I always hate waiting, but it says we are live. So
Great.
I am excited to have an amazing guest. You're a first timer. In fact, we did meet in person one time, but we don't really know each other very well. Could you go ahead and tell us who you are? And are you famous? Can I say you're famous? Because
Uh,
when I walked up to you, I was like, I know who you are, but you had no idea who I was. So I
I
think you're famous.
I think the appropriate definition would be that a lot of people have a parasocial relationship with me because they've read my book or listened to my podcast, so they feel like they know me. But at best, I'm fame-ish. So yeah, yeah. But
Not
anyway,
infamous.
yes, hopefully not infamous. Uh, but my name is Ben Schilaty. I'm a professor of social work at Utah Valley University. Most people know me because I'm a gay Latter-day Saint, and I wrote a book called "A Walk in My Shoes: Questions I'm Often Asked as a Gay Latter-day Saint" that Deseret Book published a couple years ago. That I think is fantastic. I also have a podcast called "All Out in the Open" that used to be called "Questions in the Closet," where I get together with some friends and we discuss the intersection of being LGBTQ Latter-day Saints, and it's really fun. Those are that's like kind of my professional stuff. I also help run a conference called Gather, which is Christ-centered support for LGBTQ Latter-day Saints and those who love them. It's a big conference here in Provo every year. There are a couple of regional conferences as well. About 1,200 people have come to each of the Provo conferences, so it's a
Oh
big,
wow.
a lot of people. It's a fun time. And apart from that, I like all the neural things. I like reading, watching TV. I'm a huge extrovert, so I'm always with people, and I super love cacti. I'm known for loving cacti.
Oh, well, that's because of your time in Arizona, I believe. Is that right?
Yes, I spent 5 years living in Tucson where I did my PhD.
And that's where you developed your love of cactus.
Indeed, yeah, I didn't care about them until then there, but then after 5 years in Tucson, I think they're the most beautiful plants. So
Well, very good, very good. How you came on my radar, and I don't know if this is an appropriate characterization, so correct me if I say anything wrong. But the I remember you as the quote gay administrator at BYU, and you've come over to the light side from the dark side. Is that a fair characterization, or do you like to be known as that? Or
besides the light side and the dark side, yes, it's a fair characterization. So after I finished my last degree, which was a master's in social work at BYU, I got a job as an honor code administrator at BYU. So I was worked in the honor code office for 4 years, and I had an amazing time there. It was so wonderful. So I know that you're not a BYU guy, but I have 3 degrees from BYU that I call
oh
my three
wow,
glory. And I spent 4 years working there full time. So this is no joke, but BYU is my favorite place on the planet.
oh, okay, well,
And I live across the street. I'm like a block from BYU right now. So
oh really? Okay, well, we welcome you here at Utah Valley University. Yeah, that's where we both work there, so that's fantastic.
yeah, UVU is awesome as well, and I love working there. I've been there about a year and a half.
Okay, well, very good, very good. So, can you talk a little bit um, about this is LDS Faith Journeys, and by the way, I should just mention that if anybody has any questions, you can ask them in the stream, and Ben said he's willing to answer them. But can you talk about? I think personally, if I were a black man in the 1960s, like Darius Gray or some of those people, being a member of the church would have been really hard. I mean, it was hard after 1978, but extremely hard before 1978. And I think, you said you were a gay Latter day Saint. Isn't it hard just to be a member of this church? Like, how do you do it? How do you go to church? Or how do you make it work?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing I want to say is like everybody's life has complexity. Everyone's life is difficult in some way, and I don't want to say like, oh well, whose life is harder? But my life has been complicated a lot by being gay and being a Latter-day Saint. The truth is that if you were like to look at like the hand of cards I was dealt for my life, I was given the easiest hand of cards. Like I have a family that is so kind and loving and affirming. Like I'm close with everyone in my family. Like my brain works well, my body works well. I just have like naturally good mental health. If something bothers me when I go to bed at night, like when I wake up in the morning, I feel better. I just have like I was dealt a really easy hand. And so for me, it's easy to kind of parse out the difficulties that come from being a gay Latter-day Saint because everything in my life, almost everything else in my life has been pretty simple, to be honest. But yeah, it's been really tough. And you talked like you kind of compared a little bit to race and the priesthood, like pre 1978 and post 1978. I don't know what's going to happen with the church in the future, so I don't know if we're in a pre or post time right now. But what I know is, in my lived experience right now, I have a lot of unanswered questions. And to put it in like a really really simple terms, in my 20s, when I first acknowledged that I was gay, I knew I was gay, in my teens, but I wouldn't have used that term. I thought it was something that would go away on my mission, so I didn't really acknowledge that I was attracted to guys until I was 21. And if you talk to me in my 20s, most of my 20s, I felt that there was something wrong with me, like God told Nephi that if you go and do, he'll prepare a way, and God has commanded me to get married to a woman in the temple. So I am broken. I have this thing that needs to be fixed. I just need to do everything I can so God will bless me with healing. So I thought there's something wrong with me that I need to change. And then in my late 20s and early 30s, I came to the realization, like, I don't think this is something that's wrong with me. It's part of my mortal experience. And I've tried to change. I've prayed, I fasted, I've done everything I could to change and experienced no change. So then the church has to change. Like there's something wrong, like the church is broken, the church is wrong, the church has to change. And so I'm trying to get out of this place now of either I need to change or the church needs to change, just like live in what is and try and find my best way forward there. So that's a really simple explanation of like the complexity of the last 42 years of my life. So
Okay. So I would assume that you would empathize with people who didn't grow up in a supportive environment and have had to walk away from the church just for their mental health. I mean, can you address? I mean, how should we, straight members, I guess,
yeah.
react to a gay friend or whatever? I mean, that's kind of a weird question, but
Yeah, thank you. So, apart from being a professor of social work at Utah Valley University, I'm also a therapist. So I see about 5 clients a week, and most of my clients are LGBTQ Latter-day Saints. And so this is an issue that comes up a lot, and I've met well over 1,000 LGBTQ Latter-day Saints, like in my professional life, my personal life, in my work giving firesides, and I just met I know a lot of people in this space, and I do not judge anyone for taking a step away from the church or for taking a break from church, because it is a really difficult place to be. And one of the issues is that our community doesn't know what to do with us, because the expectation is that all of us at some point will be in a heterosexual marriage so that we can be exalted and become like our heavenly parents. And so what do you do if that doesn't fit? It just creates all these complications, and a lot of wondering, like, do I belong? How do I fit in? And I think, people who are single, people who are divorced can relate to this feeling like, oh, do I belong in this community? Do I fit in? Because our church prizes marriage between a man and woman so much and talks about it so much as being like the purpose of this life is to get married and have a family. So what happens if you don't fit that mold is so hard and so painful. And so I just really want to empathize with. So I do empathize with people who make the choice to leave. That's not the choice that I have made, and I'll tell you why. So when I was about 30 years old, I had fallen in love with my best friend, who was also a gay member of the church, and we had a romantic relationship, but we lived in different states. So we were talking on the phone all the time, but this wasn't like a physical relationship. This wasn't a dating relationship. But he was trying to like leave the church and take me with him so that we could like eventually work towards marriage. And I was trying to stay in the church and keep him with me as like my awesome best friend forever. Like, let's be platonic best friends forever who are also in love, and those two goals just didn't align. And so that fell apart. When that fell apart, I was devastated, just so devastated. I got in my car in Arizona and drove 2 days to my parents' house in Washington and just unloaded all these years of unsaid things on them. Like they knew I was gay, but we didn't talk about it much. And so I just like told them about like how I felt like there wasn't a place in the church for someone like me. And they really empathized and listened. And I told them about this guy that I had a romantic relationship with, and they had met him but didn't know that we were together. And when I was done talking, my mom said, "Ben, we're not just on your side, we're with you 100%. if you need to leave the church and marry that man, you and he will always be part of our family. And my dad promised me that they were going to honor my agency, that whatever I chose, they were going to honor. And so I had no fear that I was going to lose these relationships that mattered to me if I took a step away from the church. And so I think the first thing that we can do to support people who are LGBTQ members of the church is honor their agency. Like this gift that we fought so hard for in the pre-earth life, we have to honor someone's right to choose, and we have to trust them that they know the best thing for them, because we don't have the context for their entire lives. And so we just need to trust them to make the choice that's going to be best for them, just like my parents did. So I decided I was going to leave the church. I told my parents, I'm donezo. This church is stupid. There's no place in this doctrine or culture for someone like me. And but I decided I wasn't going to give up on God. And so I kept reading the scriptures and praying every day. And by the time Sunday rolled around, I'd changed my mind. So I didn't even get to miss one Sunday of church. So I was so bad at leaving the church. But during those days where I was home with my parents, I found myself reading in Matthew 26. I just want to read you a couple of verses. So this is Jesus when he's in Gethsemane, and I'm sure you're familiar with these verses. So in Matthew 26:39, it says, and Jesus went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "Oh, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt." And then a couple verses later, in verse 42, it says, "And he went away again the second time and prayed, saying, Oh, my Father, if this cup may not pass away from me, except I drink it, thy will be done." And then two verses later, it says, "And he left them and went away and prayed the third time, saying the same words." And I remember reading that and thinking, Jesus really didn't want to do this. Like, he really wanted a way out. And he was praying for a way out. And I thought, it's Christ-like to not want to do something really hard. Like, that's Christ-like. But it's also Christ-like to approach the Father and do his will, whatever it is. And so, wanting to be like Jesus, I knelt down, I said a prayer, and I said, "Heavenly Father, what cup are you offering me?" And I felt a very clear and very annoying prompting that I was being called to live my life within the teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And that changed everything for me. Like, I was already doing all the right things. Like, I was going to the temple every week. I was praying every day. I was reading my scriptures every day. I was going to church every week. Like, I was doing all the right things, and I was absolutely miserable because I felt like there was no place for me in the church. And then after this experience, I kept doing all those same things, but instead of feeling like they were holding me back or trapping me, they were suddenly life-giving. And that's because the reason I changed that, I did them changed. I was doing that because God was inviting me to be part of the kingdom of God on earth. Now, I know a lot of people who have said very similar prayers and had very different answers. And, I don't know how it all works. Like, I don't have the context for their whole lives, but God does. And I trust them. I trust God to know what's best for them. And I just want to honor people on their journeys. So that's a bit of a long answer to your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. We got a comment here. If I can figure out how to do this. Mr. Shorty says, "Live in what is." Sounds accurate, but sounds difficult. Is that true?
Of course. And like, we're talking about like my experiences at the gay saying this is hard for everybody. Like, living in reality is hard for everybody because everyone's reality is complex and difficult. And so that's no fun. But it also is how life is. And so trying to acknowledge like what is so important. And I talk about this with my clients in therapy all the time. Like, we talk about like what is real and how to live in the reality that we have and how to accept that. Because there are things about life that we just can't change. And so the best, like, if we learn to like live with what is real, we are going to be happier and healthier and be able to move forward.
Very good. All right. So I want to talk about, whatever you want to share and you can't share, but I want to talk about your time in the BYU Honor Code office. I think, the first question that pops in my mind is, obviously you were a student at BYU, so you understood the honor code, and my guess is there was probably at least one occasion where maybe a student got reported to the honor code over a gay issue. Like, was that hard for you to deal with, or are you willing to share anything along those lines?
Yeah. So first, just a little bit of background. So the CES Honor Code, so the Church Educational System Honor Code, which applies to all the church schools, has a prohibition on what's called same-sex romantic behavior. And so I knew going in, like as a student at BYU, I knew that. I knew as an employee that it was understood that I wouldn't engage in same-sex romantic behavior. So I understood that. But then as an honor code administrator, I'm the person who's there enforcing the rules.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people assume that there are all these reports about, same-sex romantic behavior happening. The 4 years that I was there, we probably had a report about same-sex romantic behavior happen about maybe 10 times a year. So really uncommon. And when a person makes a report, they have to attach their name to the report. So the majority of those reports, when someone found out that they had to attach their name to the report, they then withdrew the report. So most of the reports
Oh.
weren't even followed up on because the reporting party withdrew their report. And the handful of times I did meet with someone who was in violation of that policy, we talked about what the expectations were, and I would say, you don't have to agree with this policy, but while you're here, you do need to follow it. And so that was it truly wasn't that hard because we all entered the university understanding the policy, and so I really didn't have to enforce that rule very much. Most of what I did was academic dishonesty work, people who cheated on tests and
Oh, really?
and plagiarized papers. That was the vast majority of the work I did. So
Did you ever deal with the football and the basketball team with either alcohol or premarital sex or anything like that? Is that something you can even share?
I don't want to talk too much about the cases I worked on, but stuff like that did happen, and our office had policies, and those athletes were treated just like any other student when a report came in about them.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sure Brandon Davies was before you were there, but a lot of people are like,
Davies, that was like 2011. Like I was a student myself then. I was in the honor code office from 2019 to 2023.
Okay, because a lot of people are wondering if he got special treatment or not, and there's all the Jim McMahon stories from the '80s where Jim got away with a lot of stuff because he was Catholic.
Yeah,
But
any non-LDS student who's an athlete is bound to follow the same rules as anyone else. Like the honor code applies to everybody. The big thing that happened when I was there was ChatGPT became public, and so suddenly there was like students were starting to use AI to complete assignments, and that was just something that had never happened before. So that was a big topic of conversation during my final year there.
Oh, so did you deal more with academic dishonesty than anything than morality, I guess? I mean, not that that's not morality, but
yeah, there were issues that involved, violations of the law of chastity, or violations of the word of wisdom. People drinking or smoking or vaping, and back then the policy was also that you couldn't have piercings if you were a man, or multiple piercings if you were a woman, and that policy has changed. But I had stuff like that from time to time. Dress and grooming standards violations, but those were much less than academic
beards
stuff. that never happened. I had a handful of those my entire time there. Most of it was academic dishonesty, and also violations of laws. People that would be arrested for trespassing or theft or other crimes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that happened a lot was actually time card theft. So where students would report that they were working but not working, but getting paid for work that they didn't do. That happened regularly.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah. So it's not what people expected. So
yeah. We all think alcohol, sex, and LGBT issues. That's what the honor code is for. Because it's different than it is at other universities, because other universities don't care. Typically.
So that actually is a little incorrect. So the BYU, we didn't come up with the term honor code. We took that from other universities who also have a code of conduct. All universities have a code of conduct, and a lot of them call them the honor code as well. And they all deal with issues of expectations for students when it comes to academic honesty and things like that. And all universities, even UVU, has a code of conduct office that deals with when students violate their code of conduct. So it's a little more visible at BYU because students have to sign it every year and have to get an ecclesiastical endorsement from their bishop every year. So I think it's just more in our cultural zeitgeist at BYU. That's something that we talk about when every student at every university is bound to a code of conduct, and many universities call it their honor code. And they also have an office where students, where there are administrators who work with students who have allegedly violated the code of conduct.
Very good. We're getting some more comments. Say that one more time. I didn't hear that.
Oh, I said talking about like university policy isn't terribly thrilling, but it is.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. All right, this is from Bruce K in Georgia, I think. Why practice some the celestial doctrines of our Father in heaven while on earth when you can't be homosexual in the celestial kingdom? Might as well enjoy a terrestrial world where you can continue. That doesn't sound like a very nice question. I'm not sure, but
Well,
I'm sure you get a lot of things like this.
Indeed I do, and there is a logic there. If you're like, well, if you don't want to be in the celestial kingdom, why even work towards that? And I think that's a fair question, and sounds like an honest question as well. The reality is that there's a lot that I don't know about what life is going to look like after this life. I have lived all over the world. I've lived in Bolivia and Peru and Portugal and Mexico and like I said, in Arizona, and every time I went to a new place, I'd always seen pictures of where I was going before I got there, and it was always different than I expected every single time. And so I know that how I picture heaven, what that looks like, is something that is not accurate. Like I am picturing the celestial kingdom wrong. Like there is something about it that's going to be different than what I expect. And there is a verse it's in the New Testament, 1 John. It's not John, but 1 John 3:2.
Mhm.
And in John says, "Beloved, now are we the children of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be, but this we know, that when Christ appears, we shall be like him." And so I really love that verse, because he's saying, this is what we know now. We know that we are that we are children of God, and that when Christ appears, we want to be like him. And so there's a lot I don't understand about what heaven's going to be like. And so what matters to me is that I become like Jesus Christ. And so whether I end up in a terrestrial world or a celestial world, I want to do my best to become like Jesus Christ and develop his attributes. And so to me, it's not like, well, this thing that they're saying I don't want, like what I want is to return to live with God and live with my heavenly parents, and I want to become like their son Jesus Christ. And so I'm going to work towards that. And right now, the way I feel best to do that is by doing my best to follow the teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I hopefully, when Christ does come and when I meet him, I hope to be like him.
Okay. I talked to Greg Prince a few years ago, and he seemed, I don't know if he advocates is the right word, but he seemed to think that, currently our theology doesn't allow for, say, gay marriage. But it seems like in his case, he felt like, if we had a revelation, like, say, D&C 132, that may allow for gay relationships in the future, that our theology could handle that. What do you think about that? Is that a possibility?
I see that as a definite possibility. I think there's lots of room in our theology for same-sex relationships, if that's what God wants to reveal. I don't want to say what will or won't happen. I've talked to a lot of people who have said like this will for sure happen, or this will never ever happen, and we've gotten in trouble with that in the past, talking about polygamy or talking
Waxing
about
the priesthood.
and other topics as well, like this will for sure happen or this will never happen. And so I just want to live the teachings that we have now and trust that God is in charge. I believe very much in the 9th article of faith, that says that we believe all God has revealed, all that he does now reveal, and that he will yet reveal many great and important things pertaining to the kingdom of God. President Oakes just gave a devotional at BYU a couple weeks ago, and he talked about 4 ways to come closer to the Savior, and his 4th way was to be patient. And I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said towards the end that we need to be patient with the incomplete teachings of religion. And I thought that was a really remarkable thing for him to say. We use euphemisms a lot, like an ongoing restoration and continuing revelation, where we know that there's more to come. We know that God isn't done teaching us. So if I were to say something like our teaching on the family is incomplete, people would be like, whoa, careful there. But the reality is God has a lot more to teach us about families and the nature of families. And there are a lot of questions people have about what families will look like in the next life. And people say, well, God will work it out in the next life, which is true, but that means that he has more to teach us. And so I don't know what will or won't happen with regards to gay marriage. And I think it'd be inappropriate for me to say or to speculate. But I know that God isn't done teaching us. And I want to do my best to live the principles and the doctrine that has been revealed now in our day, in my day.
All right. Mr. Shorty has another question. Can you flesh out how to honor someone's decision to leave the church? Our sense of being the one true church blinds to how to help LGBTQ people who decide they must leave.
Yeah. This might not be a satisfying answer to that really good question. But the church has a website called counselingresources.churchofjesuschrist.org. And on counseling resources, it's meant for church leaders, so for like bishops, relief society presidents, young women's presidents, and there are a bunch of topics that are often hard for leaders to deal with, such as like early return missionaries, abuse, caregiving, and one of the topics is same-sex attraction. And in it, it says when someone discloses feelings of same-sex attraction, it says to listen and help them feel welcome. And so I think that's the best thing we can do, is to listen and to help people feel welcome, whatever they choose. Like when I have friends who've left the church, and I have so many of them, when they tell me about their experiences, I want to listen and I want to truly understand. And then I want to follow up with them like a day later, a week later, a month later, say, thank you so much for telling me that story. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about that you didn't get to with that? Or is it okay if I ask you a couple questions? And, I know that the church teachings are that there is, one true church. But, having lived in a lot of places and knowing a lot of people, I have seen that God is so much bigger than the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That God is active and working in the lives of so many people who have never heard about the church, who have heard about it and chosen not to join, and also people who were once members and have chosen to leave. And so I just trust that God is bigger than this church, and that He will work with them and love them and help them progress in their sphere of influence and with the choices that they're making. And so the best thing we can do to help someone who's choosing to leave is just like be sincerely listen to them and help them feel welcome. And Elder Ballard back in 2017 gave a talk at BYU called Questions and Answers, where he answered a bunch of questions that church members have. This was in November 2017. And one of the questions was, how do we support people who have left the church? And he said, don't preach to them. They don't need another lecture. He says they understand our doctrine and teachings. What they need and what we all need is to be loved and understood. I'm paraphrasing, but that's pretty close to what he said.
Yeah.
And another question was about how to support LGBTQ members. And this one I will quote exactly because I memorized it. He said, we need to listen to and understand what our LGBT brothers and sisters are feeling and experiencing. Certainly, we must do better than we've done in the past so that all members feel they have a spiritual home where their brothers and sisters love them and where they have a place to worship and serve the Lord. So, I think it's good to ask, what do we do when someone leaves? How do we love them and support them? But I think an even better question would be to ask, why are they leaving? And how can we make this a place that they want to be? And I am so lucky to have so many people in my life who have done that. They have listened to me, they've tried to understand me, and they have helped me know that I have a spiritual home here where I am loved and where I feel like I belong.
Well, very good. I have to tell you a strange story. I don't know. I think you don't follow gospel tangents as much as you should. But anyway, I was just talking to a polygamous family, a man with 2 wives, and they were excommunicated in 3 consecutive weeks. And I mean, one of the things they said was, we knew this was kind of against the rules and we did it anyway. And so we don't begrudge church leaders for doing that. They're enforcing the rules. But they said they continued to attend church, which was shocking to me. But until the bishop said, can you please quit coming to church? And I was like, really? Because I think the reason I'm bringing it up, I think LGBT people feel like you don't want me at church. You don't want to be reminded of this. And then to have a bishop just flat out say, can you quit coming to church? And even, Paul Reeve tells a story about a family, I think it was in Minnesota, a black family during the 50s. And the black family, just by their very presence of being black, made church members uncomfortable. And so once again, the bishop said, could you please not come to church? You make the white people uncomfortable.
Mhm.
I mean, how? So this is it's been a problem since the 50s. It's a problem today. Um, it's a problem with LGBT individuals that I mean, if the bishop flat out doesn't say don't come, they just feel unwelcome. I mean, can we do better as a church? How would you respond to, say, a bishop that came to you and said, I don't want those polygamists or those LGBT or whatever coming to church?
Yeah. So that story you share that from Paul Reeves, that book, that story was actually published in Saints, the church history, the new church history
Oh,
volume published. So I remember reading that in Saints. I think it was in volume 3, and thinking like, wow, like this is so honest of the church to put this in here, where clearly, the members here were not behaving appropriately. Like this was not a Christ-like thing to do. This was an inappropriate thing to do. And so if a bishop were to say to me, Ben, we would rather you not come and you're not welcome here. Like my first thought would be, what a dumb thing to say. Like that is so inappropriate and so rude. And so if anyone were to say that to me or to someone else like me who was trying to come to church, I'm like, that is so inappropriate. Like that is a bonkers thing to do. And I'm the kind, I can be a little feisty. And if someone thinks I don't belong or thinks that I'm like gross or shouldn't be there, my philosophy is, if you knew me, you would love me. And so I try to give them opportunities to love me. I had a situation with my former stake president about a year ago. So a year and a half ago, I performed a same-sex marriage. So I have two
oh,
friends, 2 women who were getting married, and I am licensed to perform weddings in the state of Utah. I didn't get ordained in another church, like I'm licensed through the state to do it. And so they asked me if I'd marry them. I was like, of course, like what an honor. Like you were 2 of my closest friends. I'd be thrilled to do that. And I had talked to my previous stake president about this, and he had said, well, there's no policy about it, but I discourage it. So I was like, well, there's no policy. He discourages it, but I chose to move forward.
hmm.
So a number of months later, my next stake president found out about this, and I was going to get my temple recommend renewed, and he wasn't sure that he could do it. And he's like, well, if you're performing same-sex marriages, I'm not sure you can have and this was the only one I had performed. And so I was incredibly hurt. It took over about a month for him to talk to an area authority to get the answer and find out what to do. And so for a whole month, I didn't have a temple recommend, and it was incredibly painful for me. And I felt so hurt because I had done my due diligence. Like I had asked and had been told I couldn't. There was no policy about it in the handbook. And so when I got my recommend, I kind of let him have it a little bit. Like I gave him a bit of a talking to, but he took it kindly. And then he was released a couple of days later, like just in the normal cycle of stake presidents getting released. And then I went to the temple the next week and I saw his name on my recommend. And I was like, oh no, I'm going to have to think about this person every time I go to the temple. And so I was like, I need to forgive this man. So I invited him and his wife over for dinner. And I invited over some of my neighbors who I had forgotten this, but like were really good friends of his. And so we just had a blast, like sitting and talking for an hour and a half. And I got to see him as a person, and he got to see me as a person. Now, we're not good friends. I haven't seen him since then. But I truly believe that if someone takes the time to get to know me, they will love me. And maybe that's my arrogance, or maybe it's my belief in the goodness of human beings. So if someone says you are not welcome at church, that is such a shame. And I would hope that they would take the time to get to know us, because if they knew us, they would love us and they would want us to be in their communities.
Wow, you know how to turn the other cheek. Like that's amazing to me.
Yeah.
I'm not that good.
And Rick, that's so kind of you to say that, but like I knew for my peace, I needed to forgive him. Like he has no idea that he hurt me. He has no idea how I wrestled with that. I did not invite him over for dinner so he could feel better. I invited him over for dinner so I could feel peace, and I did. It was forgiving him was selfish on my part.
It was selfish. I need to develop your kind of selfishness. I'm not very good at turning the other cheek. Let's see. One of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about is, we've just had a new apostle called Clark Gilbert. And if you're on the Bloggernacle, a lot of of people have been upset about that. Clark Gilbert kind of seems like he was the one that really hardened the position on LGBT at BYU, and I know he was at BYU Idaho and probably made some waves there. Do you want to? Is that something you could weigh in on Clark Gilbert being the new apostle? Is that bad for LGBT people? What do you think?
Yeah. So just a couple of things to share. So I have never had a full conversation with Elder Gilbert. Like, we've exchanged pleasantries a handful of times, but he is not a person that I know. So I can't speak from like a personal, like I know him perspective. But when he was called to be an apostle, like when it was announced, I was changing my clothes to go to the temple. Like I had a 5:30 appointment at the temple, and it like KSL announced it at like 4:58 or something. So
wow.
I'm changing my clothes, and one of my friends calls me, and she says, "Hey, we got a new apostle." And I said, "Who is it?" And she said, "It's Clark Gilbert." And I said, "You're kidding me." And she said, "No, really." I said, "This is a prank. Like, this cannot be real." Like, I was so shocked, just like absolutely shocked. She said, "No, it's real." And I pulled out my phone and looked up. I was like, and surely enough, it was real. I was absolutely shocked. He was not who I expected to be called to be an apostle, because he had ruffled a lot of feathers. And we've had controversial apostles in the past, but they were always controversial after they were called, not before. And so I don't really know of a time in church history where someone who had ruffled a lot of feathers was then called to be an apostle. But then I had to go to the temple. So I didn't have time to process it. I just went to the temple, and as I scanned my recommend, I'm surprised I have 2 scanning recommend stories in this interview today. But as I scanned my recommend, I was like, oh, they don't know we have a new apostle, because they've been sitting in the temple. And so I said, "Hey, did you hear that we got a new apostle?" And they said, "No, who is it?" And I said, "It's Elder Clark Gilbert." And they said, "Oh, isn't that wonderful?" I said, "It is wonderful." And I, walked in, and then, a little bit later, when I was sitting in the slusher room, I was like, "Okay, God, I feel uneasy about this. He's not who I expected you to call to be an apostle. Like, what do you have to say to me?" And so I just sat in the slusher room and thought for a while. And one of the first things that came to my mind was a memory from January of this year. On the first Saturday in January, as I was thinking about what to fast for, I didn't have anything I thought that came to mind I needed to fast for. And so I prayed, and I said, "Heavenly Father, what do you want me to fast for?" And I felt the prompting to pray and fast that the brethren would select the right man to be the new apostle. And so that memory came to my mind. And then I just felt a lot of peace sitting in the slusher room. So that was on Thursday, and then Sunday rolls around, and when I walked into church, I remembered that it was Ward Conference, and I was going to get the chance to sustain Elder Gilbert, and I hadn't taken the time to like prepare myself mentally for that. And I was like, "Ooh, this is someone who I have been concerned about. Like, am I prepared to sustain him?" And so, I had a couple minutes to think about it, and when it came time to do it, I raised my arm to the square and sustained him, as a prophet, seer, and revelator. And most people are like doing that, like pretty quickly. They're not really thinking about it. They're doing the pew aerobics. But I was intentional about it, and so my arm stayed up probably like 2 beats longer than everyone else's, because I really wanted to feel like I want to do my best to support this person in his calling as a prophet, seer, and revelator, and as an apostle. None of these experiences have changed the negative feelings I've had, but they do put me in a place where like I trust the process, and I trust that all this is for the good of the kingdom of God. Reservations aside, I think that I feel prepared to move forward, I guess is what I'm trying to say here.
Wow, that's amazing. I want to bring this up. One of my favorite listeners, where is it? Is Deb Luce. She says hello from Comanche, Iowa. She's a member of the Community of Christ. They do allow gay marriage in their church. And when you mentioned the sustaining, I went to their world conference this past year. In fact, Stacy Cram is right behind me on the shelf there, right there. She's the new prophet. I can't point very well. She's the new prophet of the Community of Christ. And unlike LDS General Conference, when they ask for people opposed, every vote always somebody opposes. And so it's it's interesting that you sustained when that because it's not quite the same way in the community of Christ. But good to see you, Deb. um, Anne says, so are you a big proponent of radical acceptance, and teach it, which I don't know if that's a social work or what mental health, I don't know. Maybe you could talk about what radical acceptance is before you answer that question.
Yeah. So the philosophy that I come from as a social worker, and this comes from our code of ethics, is what's called client self-determination. And so, in the gospel context, we just call that agency. So, so with client self-determination, the client gets to decide how they want to move forward. They get to decide what is best for them. Like, it's not about me, my values, my position in the world. It's all about them and what they want to do and how they want to move forward. And I try and help them move forward in a value-based direction based on their values in a way that's going to be healthiest and happiest for them. So as far as radical acceptance, I'm in a place where I want to trust people and what they say and what they share, and I want to honor the choices that they make. And so that's how I move forward.
Okay. All right. Another comment here from Mr. Shorty. Maybe talk a little bit more about Gather. I do want to ask you, I know there are some other groups like Affirmation, and I think, is it North Star? So how is Gather similar or different to those? And do you have any comments on those other organizations?
Yeah, lots of people have been doing a lot of great work for a long time to support LGBTQ Latter-day Saints and former Latter-day Saints and people who experience same-sex attraction. There's a lot of work that's been happening for a long time. So Affirmation is the oldest support organization. They've been around, I don't know, 45, maybe 50 years, a really long time. And their demographics have tended to support people who are either no longer in the church, but who wants some kind of spiritual connection, whether it be like singing the hymns, talking about their background experiences. There are a lot of people who are still active in the church who go. I've been to Affirmation conferences many times. North Star is kind of on the other end. They're supporting people. I think a lot of people who go to North Star wouldn't describe themselves as gay, but they would say that they have same-sex attraction or SSA. And they're all about keeping their covenants and staying faithful to the teachings of God and the commandments and the church. And so they would say like people in same-sex marriages, like that's a sin. And so I've been loved and welcomed in both communities, but also judged in both communities. So to some people I'm too churchy, and to some people I'm too gay.
This is why we're going to get along, because I get the same stuff.
Yeah. So like in my podcast, I co-hosted with my friend Charlie Bird, and Charlie was Cosmo the Cougar at BYU a couple years ago, like the famous dancing Cosmo. And then he got married to his husband, but still goes to church. And so to some people say like, well, that is a terrible thing to do, and for different reasons. Like, well, why would you go to this bigoted homophobic church? And others say, well, why would you not follow God's commandments? And so since I've been associated with Charlie, I don't think people at North Star would be happy if I spoke there. So Gather is more of a middle space where we want people who want to connect with the Savior, who want to honor their identities, who don't want to live in shame, but also move forward in the way that works for them. So about 80 to 90% of people who attend Gather are active in the church. I think 80% of our attendees go to church at least once a month, and I think it's a little over 90 go to church almost every week. So almost everyone who goes to Gather is active in the church. There are a lot of people who attend Gather who are in same-sex marriages or are pursuing same-sex dating. And about 40% of the people who attend are LGBTQ. About 40% are parents of LGBTQ individuals, and another 20% are like friends, allies, church leaders, and things like that. And so, our philosophy is we want to offer Christ-centered support, and we want you to live your life in the way that makes sense for you as you work out your relationship with God. And so we're not telling anyone, what to think or what to do or how to live their life. So for someone like me, who's like active in the church, but also, has a temple recommend and is not pursuing dating or marriage to a man, like I am loved and welcome to gather. And for someone like Charlie, who is also active in the church but in a same-sex marriage, like he is loved and welcome to gather. And for someone who is asexual or aromantic or both those things and says, I don't want to be married, I'm choosing not to be endowed in the temple because I'm not sure those are commitments I want to make, but I go to church, they're loved and welcome to gather. And if someone's like, what, the church doesn't work for me anymore, I don't want to attend anymore, but I love singing the hymns, I want to meet other people with a similar background, they're also loved and welcome to gather. And what the conference looks like, we have main stage speakers. Last year we had a speaker who was an L, a G, a B, a T, a Q, an I, and an A. I'll talk about their relationship with the Savior. And we have songs and musical performances. We also have a lot of breakout sessions and workshops, and just a lot of time to connect with people and make friends. The feedback we get every year is people just want to connect. They want to talk to other people who are going through similar experiences, because in most wards, if there are out LGBTQ people, there might be one or two. And so it's really nice for us to go to a place where we don't have to explain ourselves. Like we just get to be who we are, and we don't have to explain anything, and we're just loved for who we are. And my hope would be that in the future, we wouldn't need these kinds of support organizations because our neighborhoods, our wards, our families would provide that support, and it wouldn't be in any way taboo to have an openly gay person at church or working at BYU or any of those situations.
Yeah. I was going to ask a question, but since you just said that, Mr. Shorty, thoughts on the accusation from LGBTQ who are often a bit angry, who accuse you of being complicit because we choose to participate in the church?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when people leave the church, there's often, a lot of years where they were trying really hard to be their best and trying so hard. And LGBTQ Latter Saints have often spent years, trying to be perfect. And part of that is sometimes so that, we think if we're good enough, then God will bless us, like putting enough like coins in this like heavenly bank so that God will like reward us with blessings. Other times it's part of minority stress, being like, in order to be loved, I have to be good enough. And so there's a lot of trauma that comes with our experience at church, and a lot of pain and a lot of heartache. And so when we leave, that trauma doesn't just go away, like that's still there. And so if someone says the church was a toxic environment for me that I had to leave, that is a true story and one that I accept and honor. And then when I say I love the church and it's working for me, that can feel like my story is invalidating their story. And so I think for a lot of people, I represent a lot of the pain they have felt in the church. And I understand that. Like I understand that my being active in an organization that they found complicit in harming them feels congruent to them and also feels painful to them. And so I understand that, and I have no problem with that. And so I want to honor like that person's pain. If they come, they're like, Ben, you going to church hurts me, and I hate that you do it. I'd say, well, let's talk about it, and like let's sit down. I would want to understand where they're coming from. And this happens a lot with LGBTQ children, like kids who are LGBT, not like small kids, but like LGBTQ people with parents. Sorry, and we're often adults, and they'll say to their parents, like, if you attend this church, you don't love me. And that is such an understandable place to be in. Like if like this thing caused me pain, and you were involved in the thing that caused me pain, therefore you were causing me pain by being part of this thing. Like those are all real feelings, but it's just not fair to say, well, if you were doing this, and therefore you don't love me, because people are complex. We make a lot of choices for a lot of different reasons, and there are plenty of ways to love your LGBTQ kiddo and support the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so if someone is in pain because of someone's activity in the church like mine, I would say, hey, let's talk about this. Like, let's sit down, and I want to hear where you're coming from. I want to validate what you're saying. And when I've done that, people have always said, I don't get what you're doing. It makes no sense to me, but I trust you to know what's best for you. And so, yeah, it's not about convincing. It's about just like listening, understanding, and like letting people be where they are.
Do you think, I mean, I think you've got such a great attitude. Is it because you've had social work training that you have this attitude? Because you can talk to people that disagree with you. Um, is that because of your training that you can do this? Because I think it's hard for most people.
Yeah, I think that for sure has helped. Like as a social worker, like I'm trained to listen to people and understand what they're saying, especially when it doesn't align with my values or my life experience. And so, that's something that I've put a lot of practice into. A lot of like, okay, well, help me understand. Like, tell me what this experience is like. And part of that, like part of my social work training has also included getting to know like a lot of different stories and a lot of different experiences. I had a client who was transgender. I've had a number of trans clients, but I'm not a transgender person. So from personal experience, I do not know what that's like. So I spent time, reading books, listening to podcasts to try and understand the trans experience, especially in religious context, because that's who I tend to work with. And so I was talking to a trans client. I said, well, a lot of trans people who are experiencing this are also experiencing this. Is that something you're experiencing? And my client said, yes. How did you know? And I said, well, because I've done my research. I've taken time to do what elder Ballard. I've listened to and understood our LGBT brothers and sisters. I've taken time to do that. And so my hope would be like I've busted my butt trying to give people resources and educate them on the LGBTQ lifestyle experience. That's why I wrote my book, which I got a prop copy right here. I'll show you. A Walk in My Shoes.
All right.
And my podcast, All Out in the Open. Because I want to give people venues to understand, so that when these issues come up in their lives, when they have an LGBTQ loved one, they're not starting at square one, but they're already advanced on their journey of understanding, and then they can take time to understand the individual in front of them instead of the broad experience.
More my specialty is like church history and, well, mostly church history. And so I'm way more familiar with people that are, hey, I learned about polygamy or I learned about the race ban and it upset me and this sort of a thing. Can that be translated to LGBT issues as well? Is that something that you experience where people, instead of maybe LGBT, they come to you with like, polygamy seems really wrong to me. I mean, do you have any experience with that?
Yeah. So since I was a teenager, I've like loved church history so much. My favorite class I took at BYU was a church history in the 20th century class. So I've read a ton. I've listened to so many podcasts. I've probably listened to like 1,000 episodes of Mormon stories in my life. So I've listened to a lot of diverse perspectives. I've read a lot of books. So when someone says polygamy doesn't make any sense to me, like this is hard for me, I'm like, yeah, I get it. This is hard.
It is hard.
And I can validate that. But I've also listened to stories of the people who say that Joseph Smith didn't practice polygamy, and like what great news that like the Brigham Young made this up, and we don't have to believe this because Joseph Smith didn't. Like I've heard those stories too.
Yeah.
So I feel like I've gotten a diverse perspective on when it comes to polygamy in particular. And so when someone has those issues, like, yeah, let's talk about it. But my approach is like what I try to have my approach be when I'm working with like talking with friends and loved ones is not to try and give them the answer, but to like validate them, share my experiences, share like where I've come to with all this. And a lot of it for me is just like, yeah, it doesn't make sense. Like I have a
I
lot
agree.
of and yet when I read the Book of Mormon, I feel the presence of God. Like when I go to the temple, I leave feeling empowered with my shoulders squared. Like when I pray, I feel something happen. And so because of my personal experiences, I have a ton of questions and a lot of things that don't make sense to me. But my personal experience has shown me like God is there and real. The Book of Mormon brings me closer to Jesus. And when I am part of this community called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, like I feel like I'm a better person.
Yeah, well, very good. Well, I don't want to keep you too long. I want to really thank you for your time and being here on LDS Faith Journeys and Gospel Tangents. It's going to be on both podcasts. Do you have any last thoughts you want to share with the audience?
I do have one final thought. So, I don't know the demographics of your audience super well, so I don't know like what they'll be taking from this exactly. But one of my fears in sharing my story is that people will look at my life and be like, "Oh, Ben's got this figured out. Like every gay Latter-day Saint should be just like Ben." Like that is one of my
Right.
bigger. And so at the beginning of my book, I share this analogy. I'm not wearing glasses today, I'm wearing contacts. But the analogy is that I wear glasses, and telling someone to be like me would be like taking the glasses off of my face and then putting them on someone else's face and be like, oh, here, these will help you see better. And that will just give them blurry vision and a headache. So I firmly believe that we all have our own prescriptions, that God loves us as individuals and can speak to us as individuals. That's why we believe in personal revelation. But with that fear in mind, I wrote this on the second to last page of my book. And sometimes when I write, like I have good ideas, I feel like, and sometimes I feel like an idea came from outside of me. And this is one of those paragraphs that came from outside of me. So this is on the second to last page of my book. I just want to read this to you. I wrote, I have one parting request. If you were tempted to give this book to an LGBTQ friend or loved one, I would ask you to resist that temptation and pause for a moment. Instead of giving them my story, can you invite them to tell you theirs?
Mm.
Now, when my dad read that, he was like, that's not a very good way to sell books. I was like, well, I'm not trying to sell books. I'm trying to teach people. And so if people...
Well, I was going to ask, is this for straight people, not for gay people?
Yeah, I wrote my book for straight people, yes.
Okay.
Gay people can get stuff from it too, but my audience is like parents, and like that's who my audience is, like parents and
Okay.
like want to understand. But I am so honored that people took the time to hear my story today and to get to know me a little bit better. But the truth is, like we don't know each other. Like the listener, like we're not going to hang out, and that's a bummer because I'm sure the listener is really cool. But every person listening right now has an LGBTQ friend or loved one. Every single person, and those stories are the stories that matter. And so, listening to them, understanding their story, is the thing that I think will make our communities better, will heal hearts, and that's my invitation. Like take time to listen to and understand the LGBTQ people in your lives, and we need to do a better job of that than we've done in the past.
All right. Well, I'll close with this one. Walter Reed up in Wisconsin says, amazing discussion. Thanks. And I thank you, Ben Schilaty. I'll have you hang on for just 1 second. But thank you so much for being here on LDS Faith Journeys and Gospel Tangents. And thanks to all who participated. And we'll see y'all online. Thanks.